Sorry for the late start. So we're going to start our class today. I want to welcome you to the biology grade 11 class. Today's topic will be the circulatory system. Many of you may have already had that topic. Some of you may still be in that topic. Some of you may not have done it already. So this will benefit everyone. Okay. So, like I said, it says we're looking at the circulatory system. So our objectives for today are we're going to identify the structures of the human heart, relate the structures to their function, talk about the direction that blood flows through the heart, predict effects of exercise on the pulse rate, talk about some of the common disease of the heart, and talk about pacemakers. Now, we will not be able to get through all of this, but we will continue on as we have our classes. So the circulatory system. So the cells in your body need supplies to carry out their functions, and they create waste. So if you create waste, that means you need to get rid of it. So that's where the circulatory system comes in, because it controls the flow of blood through the body in order to support cells with what they need and carry away the waste that the cells have created. So the major parts of the circulatory system are 1, the heart, 2, the blood, and 3, the blood vessels. Okay? So what is the function of our heart? First of all, our heart is only the size of a closed fist, this big, in my case. Okay, and the main function of the heart is to pump blood around the body by contracting and relaxing, because it's a muscle. As we all know, muscles contract and relax to cause movement. And we can see our little GIF there showing our heart contracting. So the heart beats about 70 times in 1 minute. The right side of the heart takes blood from the body and pumps it to the lungs. And the left side of the heart takes blood from the lungs and pumps it into the rest of the body. And as the PowerPoint says, that blood is now filled with oxygen. Before the blood that comes from your body has now been depleted of oxygen, hence why it's now going into the lungs to to refill itself with oxygen in order to carry it back to the body. So the location of our heart, it's right in the middle of our chest. Notice one of the lungs are smaller than the other. That's the left lung, so that it's able to properly position the heart. The heart has enough space for it to move. That's why one of the lungs are smaller, okay? And as it says, it's located underneath your sternum. So if you are able to touch right here, this bone right here in the middle of your chest is your sternum. It is underneath that. Okay, and that's why as a doctor, if you go to the doctor places the stethoscope right here and tell you to be silent so he or she can hear your heartbeat. So what are some internal structures of the heart? We have the superior vena cava. We have the different valves. So the first one we're going to look at, we're going from the superior vena cava, the aortic semilunar valve, the pulmonary semilunar valve, the right atrium, the tricuspid valve, the inferior vena cava, the aorta, the pulmonary artery, the 2 pulmonary veins, the left atrium, the bicuspid, the left ventricle, the right ventricle. So let's go ahead again. The 4 chambers of the heart, as we know, are the right atrium, the left atrium, the right ventricle, and the left ventricle. Give me a second, please. Okay, so the functions of the different chambers of the heart are: the right atrium receives deoxygenated blood and pumps it to the right ventricle. So as we said before, the deoxygenated blood is the blood that comes from the body. The left atrium receives the oxygenated blood and pumps it to the left ventricle. So that oxygenated blood, as we also said before, is coming from the lungs. The right ventricle is the one that pumps the blood to the lungs after receiving that blood from the right atrium, and the left ventricle pumps the blood around the body after receiving that oxygenated blood from the lungs via the left atrium. So here are the different veins and arteries of the heart. We have the superior vena cava, the pulmonary veins, the inferior vena cava, the aorta, the left pulmonary artery, and the pulmonary veins. So what are the functions of these arteries and the veins of the heart? So the aorta is the largest and strongest artery. It carries oxygenated blood to all parts of the body from the heart. The pulmonary artery, which is the second largest artery, carries deoxygenated blood to the lungs. The vena cava, whether it be the superior or the inferior, is the largest vein of the body, which carries deoxygenated blood from the body to the right atrium. So a point, the words inferior and superior. Inferior just means that the vena cava is found at the bottom half of your body, below the heart, and the superior means the top part of the vein, okay? So if we talk about the inferior vena cava, you know, it's found more in your body. And if we talk about the superior vena cava, we know it's found more so up to the top of your body. So the pulmonary vein returns oxygenated blood from the lungs to the left atrium of the heart. So here we go again. The left and right atria are smaller chambers that pump blood into the ventricles. The left and right ventricles are stronger pumps. The chambers are separated by the septum. The septum is a part in the heart that separates both sides of the heart. So you have the left atrium and the left ventricle on one side, the right atrium and the right ventricle on the other side. The left ventricle is the strongest because it has to pump blood all around the body. And just a point of note, we're starting from your chest and going all the way down to your toe. That's a very long distance to cover. So the walls of your left ventricle has to be strong and thick in order to push that blood through the aorta into your body. And the tendons are attached to the muscles of the valve. So we talk about valves of the heart. You have the tricuspid valve, which is found between the right atrium and the ventricle. We have the aortic valve between the aorta and the left ventricle. As we talk about, as you can see, the aortic valve comes from the word aorta, hence you will only find it near the aorta. The pulmonary valve is found between the left ventricle and the pulmonary artery. And the bicuspid or the mitral valve is found between the left atrium and the ventricle. Okay? So heart valves assure that blood flow in only one direction through the heart. Only up from here. The blood does not go down, only up. Or should I say only, it follows the pattern that the veins has. So if the vein is going from your right atrium into your lungs, there's a valve there so that the blood does not go back down. It needs to continuously go into your lungs, nowhere else, just the lungs. The valve only open in one direction, which prevents the backflow, assuring blood is flowing in the correct direction. So the aortic valve allows oxygenated blood to pass through it. The pulmonary valve allows deoxygenated blood to pass through it. And again, the tendons support the valves. So let's identify the four chambers of the heart. You have, a point of notice. in your exam, if you see a picture of the heart like how you're looking at the screen now, I always tell my students to flip it. So if you're gonna take, you can take your paper once the examiner doesn't make a big fuss. Just quietly flip it onto your chest so you'll be able to identify. Or another note, whatever is on your right side on the paper, once you're looking at it, it will be the left side of your heart. Whatever is the left side on the diagram will be the right side of our heart. Okay? So this will be our left atrium, This will be our left ventricle. This will be our right aorta. This will be our right ventricle. Another way to remember, this piece right here is the aorta. So if this is the aorta, the next part of the heart underneath the aorta will definitely be the left atrium. So you can follow it from there. So the pathway of blood flow in the body. So the right atrium receives oxygen poor blood, or another word as we know, deoxygenated blood from the body, and is pumped to the ventricle through the tricuspid valve. Now that deoxygenated blood is brought to the right atrium via the vena cava. The right atrium pumps the oxygen poor blood or the oxygenated blood to the lungs through the pulmonary valve. The left atrium provides oxygen-rich blood from the lungs or oxygenated blood and pumps it to the left ventricle through the mitral valve. And this oxygenated blood comes via the pulmonary vein. Okay, the left ventricle pumps the oxygenated blood or oxygen-rich blood through the aortic valve into the aorta, which then pumps that blood to the rest of the body. The right side of your heart receives the oxygenated blood or oxygen-poor blood from your veins and pumps it to your lungs, where it picks up the oxygen and gets rid of carbon dioxide. The left side of your heart receives the oxygen-rich blood or oxygenated blood from your lungs and pumps it through your arteries so that that blood can go to the rest of your body, where it can be used, oxygen can be used in different activities that the cells need. So here we are with the pathway of the blood that we just spoke about. So let's follow the arrows. So you have this arrow started from the vena cava, right? It goes up, up, goes into there we were following these arrows here. So it goes up into the right atrium, down into the right ventricle, up through the valve, the pulmonary valve, which then carries it into the lungs. The lungs will be found a little bit above your heart, right? So once it goes into the lungs, what happens next? It gets oxygenated, receives the oxygen that it lacks, comes around, passes through the pulmonary vein into the left atrium, comes down into the left ventricle, passes through the valve, which is the mitral valve, goes up into the aorta. Some goes to the upper body, and the rest goes down into the rest of our lower body, okay? So here's a little activity for you that you can label the parts of the heart. So number 1 would be the vena cava. Number 2 would be the right atrium. Number 3 will be a valve. I think this is a tricuspid valve. Yes. And how do we know it's a tricuspid valve? Notice it has 3 tendons attached to it. So that's what make it tricuspid. 3 means tri. So it passes through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Then it goes up, 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 up. Number 5 will be the pulmonary vein. Number 6, I'm not sure about number 6. Let's take a look. Not too sure about number 6, but number 7 would be the pulmonary artery. Where's number 8? I don't see a number 8. Number 9 would be the pulmonary vein. Number 10 would be the left aorta. Number 11 would be the bicuspid valve or the mitral valve. As we see again, it has 2 tendons. 2 means bi. Number 12 would be the left ventricle. Number 13 would be the aortic valve. And number 14 would be the aorta. So let's look at the types of circulation. So we have different types of circulation. We have pulmonary circulation, systemic circulation, and double circulation. So the pulmonary circulation, this is the circulation of the blood from the heart to the lungs and back to the heart, which is normally carried out by the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein. The systemic circulation is circulation of the blood from the heart to the rest of the body and back to the heart, which is normally carried out by the aorta and the vena cava. The double circulation has to do with the heart being divided into two halves. Each half works as a separate pump. One side of the heart pumps blood to the lungs and back to the heart. The other side pumps blood to all of the parts of the body and back to the heart. And these two pumps are working simultaneously or at the same time. So it says blood travels through the heart twice on one complete journey around the body. So here we have it. So we have pulmonary circulation, which flows from the heart, between the heart and the lungs. And there we have it. So the pulmonary circulation happens with the vena cava, the pulmonary artery, the lungs, and the pulmonary vein. And the systemic circulation happens with the different arteries and veins of the lower body, the aorta, and the vena cava again. And we said systemic circulation happens between the heart and the rest of the body. So here we have all the major arteries and veins of the heart, which you will get to see furthermore when you open your PowerPoint. Heart sounds. Now we all know when we put our hands on our chest, we hear 2 sounds. Boop. Some people say boop, 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 boop. It's not boop, boop. It's actually lub, dub. That sound is created by the contraction and relaxation of the heart and flow of blood. Lub is made by the closing of the tricuspid and bicuspid valves, and the dub, which is the last sound, is made by the closing of the aortic and pulmonary valves. Our pulse. The stretching and relaxing of arteries can be felt as a pulse. The pulse can be felt in different places where the arteries pass close to the skin. The most common one we know is our radial pulse, which is found by our wrist. We also know about our pulse here from our carotid artery underneath our neck. And there's also another one you can get by your groin area or near your ankle. It says age, weight, and lifestyle can affect the average pulse rate. Blood pressure is the pressure that blood exerts against the artery walls. So this is the force, blood pressure again, is the force of the blood against the walls of the artery, and it is recorded by two numbers, the systolic number and the diastolic number. And a sphygmomanometer is used to measure blood pressure. That's the cup that you go when you go to the clinic, when you're in triage, that they put around and they manually pump. Or some clinics and hospitals have the digital one where they just put on, they press the button, bam, your blood pressure shows up. So the heartbeat has two phases. When the muscles of the heart contract, it is called the systole. When the muscles of the heart are completely relaxed, this is called diastolic. Okay? The heartbeat is reflected through the body as a pulse. The systolic pressure is when the ventricles contract and blood is pushed out of the heart. The diastolic pressure occurs as the ventricles become filled with blood before they contract again. The measurement is written with one of the numbers above and the other one below. With this other one below. So the systolic number is found at the top and the diastolic number is found at the bottom. For example, our reading 120/80 means that your systolic number is 120 and your diastolic number is 80. Okay, and the mmHg is millimeters of mercury, but it's verbally said as 120/80 or 110/70. The heartbeat increases with exercise as contractions of the muscle need more oxygen and nutrients carried by the blood. Sudden noises and increased exercise cause an increase in heartbeat. For those that do track or those that exercise or those who just decide when they just get up and sprint, your heart rushes really fast. That's why you have to take time to rest, breathe, for your heartbeat to become regular again. And adrenaline is another substance that increases the heart rate. Adrenaline is that hormone that you use to fight or flight. If you're afraid, you just get up and pitch up, your heart rate starts to beat. Or if a dog went after you, you get afraid and you just start, your heart goes kaput. So a pacemaker. A pacemaker is a small device that's placed in the chest to help control abnormal heart rhythms. This device uses electrical impulses to prompt the heart beat at a normal rate. So the body naturally has a pacemaker, but if your pacemaker does not work anymore, the doctor will then go to the doctor and he will then insert an artificial pacemaker. Okay, so we know our heart is as small as our fist. It is found in our chest, more onto the left side. We know that our heart has 4 different chambers: a right atrium, a left atrium, a left aorta, and a left ventricle. Okay, we know that oxygenated blood is found on our left side of our heart. Deoxygenated blood is found on the right side of our heart. Okay, we know that the deoxygenated blood enters the heart via the vena cava and it's coming from our body. We know that oxygenated blood is sent from the heart into our body via the aorta. We know that deoxygenated blood is sent to the lungs via the pulmonary artery. We know that oxygenated blood is sent into the heart via the pulmonary vein. Okay, we know how does blood flow. We know that it goes from our body via the superior vena cava into our right atrium. It passes through the tricuspid valve, and we know that it's called a tricuspid valve because 3 tendons hold that valve in place. It then goes from the right atrium through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle, up into the pulmonary artery, passes through the pulmonary valve, goes into our lungs, gets oxygenated, gets all the love it needs to carry it back into the heart, comes back into the heart via the pulmonary vein, passes into the left aorta, down into the left atrium, but it has, not left atrium, sorry, the left ventricle, and it has to pass through the bicuspid valves in order to get into that ventricle, goes up into the aorta, has to pass the aortic valve. Once it gets into the aorta, it then passes into our body. Now you have parts of the aorta that leads into the upper part of the body, and you have parts of the aorta that leads down to your body. Okay, we know that there's a pacemaker naturally in our hearts, but if our pacemaker does not work, the doctor inserts a new one. You have two types of circulation. Pulmonary circulation, which deals with the blood going from the heart into the lungs, back into the heart. We know you have systemic circulation, which goes from the heart to the body and back to the heart. And double circulation just has to do with the heart being separated into two separate pumps that's pumping simultaneously. One side dealing with heart, lung, heart, the next side dealing with heart, body, heart. Okay, and that will be the end of class for today. See you next time. So the subtopic under that circulatory system is the blood vessels. And as the picture shows, we have three of them: arteries, veins, and capillaries. So today we're going to learn about the major blood vessels, describe the major blood vessels, the difference in the composition of blood in the pulmonary artery and the vein, compared with the type of blood in the arteries and veins, and we're going to differentiate between the veins and the arteries. Okay? So what are blood vessels? Blood vessels is the medium in which blood travels throughout your body in a hollow tube. The three types of blood vessels are arteries, capillaries, and veins. So the first one is arteries. Arteries carry blood from the heart, except for the pulmonary artery, to all parts of the body. They have thick muscular walls and elastic fibers. Blood flowing in the arteries is normally flowing under high pressure. Arteries carry oxygenated blood except for the pulmonary artery, because the pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood, which, as we know, is an exception to the rule about arteries. The arteries have no valves present, and their lumen is usually small. So as we take a look at the picture, we see the three layers of the arteries, the small lumen, and the two extra walls, with the outer wall being extremely thick. And this is thick, as we said, because blood has to flow through the arteries under such a high pressure. So you need the thick muscles that would contract so that the blood can flow to further distances. The second one we will talk about is veins. Veins. After leaving capillaries, blood enter veins. Veins carry blood, towards the heart, except for pulmonary veins. Veins have thin elastic walls, unlike arteries, which have thick elastic walls. Valves are present, and the purpose of the valves is to prevent the backflow of blood. Veins carry deoxygenated blood. except for pulmonary veins, which carry oxygenated blood. And here again, we see that that's an exception to the rule about veins. And unlike arteries that have a small lumen, veins have a large lumen. And here we are looking at the internal structure of a vein. So we see outside the outer, if we look at a transverse section of a vein, you will see the tube-like structure, the large lumen, and a thin wall, okay? If we look deeper inside of the vein, you will actually see the valves. When blood is flowing through a vein, the valve is open. Once it has already flowed through, those valves close. It's similar like a tap at home. You turn that tap on to have your water flowing to wash your hands, your dishes, the shower, and whenever you're finished, you turn it off. So once blood has already completed its course throughout the veins, it closes. Or better yet, when your heart pumps, let's bring it into the circulatory system. When your heart pumps, it goes pump. So every time it pumps, blood flushes through the vein. And once that pump stops, the valves close. Then you have another pumping sensation, open, close. So it's a very fast action. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, close, 2, 3, 4. No, it's open, close, so that your blood can flow as smoothly as possible. So the third one are capillaries. Capillaries are tiny blood vessels that connect arteries to veins. They are very thin. Their wall is only 1 cell thick, but ease of diffusion. And as we know from grade 10, diffusion is what? The movement of a substance from an area of high concentration to low concentration. And this is done with no muscle tissue. So nutrients, oxygen, and other substances must leave the blood and get into your body's cells. Carbon dioxide and other waste leave blood cells and are carried away by the blood. A capillary is a tiny vessel that allows those changes between body cells and blood. Now, when we look at point number 1, tiny blood vessels that connect arteries to veins. So let's say my left hand, my left forearm is an artery. My right forearm is a vein. And I have my fingers interconnecting. My fingers in this case will be the capillaries. So this is actually how it works in the body. Your arteries, your veins, and your capillaries that link each other. And basically the nutrients, oxygen, all the other things that are needed for the blood passes through these capillaries because they're only 1 cell thick. So their lumen, again, in this case, is very small, and blood flows at a low pressure with no valves present. And here we have a picture of a capillary. Very small lumen and the 1 cell thick outer epithelial lining. Okay? 1 minute, please. Alrighty. Here's another picture of a capillary showing you the blood cells within. And like I said, with the demonstration of our hands, this is exactly how capillaries are situated within our body. Just a connector between arteries and veins. Alrighty. So in terms of the diffusion, we can also use this picture. You will see the red blood cells flowing through the capillary, and oxygen from that red blood cell diffuses out of the red blood cells through the capillary into the body cells as well as nutrients. And those body cells that have already used up that oxygen, that has already used up that food, has now quote unquote burped, now is excreting that carbon dioxide, excreting that waste back into the red blood cells, of course, to be carried back to the lungs And this is also done through that one cell thick lining of the capillary. Okay, so take note of these pictures. If there are any questions, you can ask them in the question and answer section, and we'll get back to that. So we've already looked at this picture at the beginning of the presentation. So let's try and complete this question. I will be looking at your answers in the chat, so feel free to answer. Welcome to Akia and Sebastian. So number 4 in this case, but it's number 1. The diagram above shows a cross-section of three types of blood vessels, and they're not drawn to scale. What is the answer for number 1? What is number 1? Correct. Number 1 is a vein. So what is number 2? What is number 2? Are you sure number 2 is an artery, Andre? Are you sure number 2 is an artery? Correct. Number 2 is a capillary, Andre. Why and how do we know? Notice the lining of the capillary has a nucleus. And as we know, the nucleus suggests that it is one cell thick. Correct. You are also correct, Kiandi. I'm assuming that's how you pronounce your name. Sorry if it's not. And number 3 is what? An artery. Correct, everyone. So number 4B. Which vessel carries blood under the highest pressure? Correct, Yasmin. Arteries carry blood under the highest pressure. You are also right, Deshay and Laura. And number C, which vessel has valves present? Veins have valves. Yes, Andre. Yes, Yasmin. Yes, Beyonce. Alrighty? And we don't have an arrow, but you can type for me. Indicate the direction of blood flow in a vein. How would blood flow? In this case, it will be to the right, the shade. Yes. So I'm going to use my pointer. In this case, as we see, blood will be flowing this way. The valves are open, and once the blood passes it, those valve doors remain shut. So good job. It's nice to know that you've listened. Is there any other questions you need to ask me before we go any further? Let me check the question and answer. Oh, yeah, so we have some other people answering. Deshaun, you were correct. Orion, you were correct. You can also answer in the chat because I may have time to look at your answers. Okay, because veins do not function at a high blood pressure, it flows very smoothly and fluidly, right? So if you do not have valves to prevent it from backflowing, you basically will be mixing up blood. Your blood will never really get back to your heart, and you could suffer from heart failure. And that's something we do not want. So those valves are in place to make sure that the blood that is deoxygenated, that is deprived of nutrients, gets into the heart to be pumped back into the lungs in order for you to keep your body moving as it should go. The blood is always oxygenating the body cells for your organs to work, for you to be able to sit down, to use your eyes to watch your virtual school biology class. So you need to always have valves in your veins. Yes, Kiandi, there's 2,560 milliliters of blood that flows through your heart. So let's do a recap. Okay, let's do this recap. So if veins have valves, arteries do not. So that is one complete difference. Deshay is telling me arteries carry blood from the heart and veins carry blood to the heart. That is correct. Is there any more? I see Mikhail is telling me, sorry, not Mikhail, Tiffany is telling me arteries have thicker walls. So that means veins have thin walls. Now, another objective we had to cover today had to do with the difference in the composition of blood between pulmonary arteries and pulmonary veins. Can you tell me a difference between the blood composition of the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein? I'll repeat the question again. What is the difference between the composition of blood flowing through a pulmonary artery and a pulmonary vein? Okay, Tiffany is saying pulmonary arteries carry deoxygenated blood, and Tiffany is again saying the pulmonary vein carries oxygenated blood, and she is correct. The pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood, and the pulmonary vein carries oxygenated blood. Now, this is the exception to the rule about arteries and veins, because as we know, veins are known to carry deoxygenated blood, but the pulmonary vein carries oxygenated blood. We also know that arteries are known to carry oxygenated blood, but the pulmonary artery is known to carry deoxygenated blood. Now, just a side note, if the pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood, what side of the heart would you find this on? The right side or the left side? If the pulmonary artery is known to carry deoxygenated blood, what side of the heart will you find this pulmonary artery? Markanique and Aliyah, you are correct. It will be found on the right side. Sebastian, Jason, and James, you are also correct. How do we know this? Because the right side of the heart it carries deoxygenated blood. So anything that has to do with deoxygenated blood will be found on your right side. And it goes the same for the pulmonary vein. Yes, it carries oxygenated blood, so definitely the pulmonary vein will be found on the left side of the heart. Now, to conclude today's class, I mentioned yesterday, for those who were there, that there are 3 or 4 ways to know how to distinguish between the left and the right side of the heart. I had said you can either flip your paper, hold your paper up, flip it around so you can clearly distinguish which side is which. I also said you can locate the left and right side by looking at that structure known as the vena cava. And you know wherever the vena cava is, that would automatically be your right side of the heart. I also said that if you can identify the aorta, you would know anything under the aorta would definitely be your left side of the heart. And one last way to identify the left and the right side is that your ventricle, which is the 2 lower chambers of the heart, the left ventricle will always be thicker. The walls of the ventricle will always be thicker than the right side. So before we end today's meeting, is there any more questions? I will go and check the question and answer section for those in there. Anonymous attendee, the class started at 2 p.m. Anonymous attendee asks, what is the function of the capillaries? The function of the capillaries basically is just to link the arteries and veins and to help with exchange of substances needed for the body.